welcome Dr. Paul McCarthy for the first episode of our series ROI in AI.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
Having 40 years into analytics field and then having multiple leadership roles, you are the perfect guest to kick off this series. And we are having absolute pleasure to host you for our series. Let me introduce Dr. Paul briefly. So he has 40 plus years spanning into multiple roles. Out of that, 30 plus years are into Ford. And apart from that, right now, he's running his own consulting company, McCarthy Consulting. And apart from that, he's advisor to the Industrial Math Program at Michigan State University. And he is board chairman for the Michigan Council of Economic Education. So with all that credentials, we welcome you to our series, ROI in AI. With all that, why don't you introduce yourself more about your career so far and the various activities you are doing right now?
All right. Well, I guess I started off doing analytics after my undergraduate degree in economics and political economy. I started at the Congressional Budget Office and had multiple short internships. My total time there was almost a year. Worked on some econometric models for natural gas price decontrol, and then I went to grad schools, PhD program at the University of Michigan, and got my doctorate, and my fields were public finance and labor and international, and luckily got a job with Ford in the economics office. And I worked on all kinds of interesting things there, starting off with regulatory policy, looking at vehicle forecasts for the US and across the world, was the international economist, so worked on hedging strategy and risk management. And while I was at corporate economics, I did some initial modeling on the determinants of residual values, which is the value of a used car, basically what's left of the value. Had worked up a really interesting cross-functional team with a science research laboratory. Our results were taken all across Ford. As a result, Ford Credit said they wanted to fund my position in corporate economics to work on their issues. And when they formed a risk management organization, they said, well, we'd like the money back and we'd like Paul with it. So I got moved over to Ford Credit and worked in risk management. And that then got, my part of it got folded in with the existing operations research group, and that formed the analytics, the global analytics function at Ford Credit. And I worked on all kinds of really interesting things there. Used car prices have so many connections into things at Ford and Ford Credit, including vehicle sales, credit losses, residual values, lease pricing, and default probabilities. So there was a great deal of very interesting modeling there. I developed some really important metrics that are being used still today as the fundamental underlying methodology for modeling credit losses over time. They also generated metrics that are used for performance evaluation. Did marketing program evaluation, which you worked on with my team, and pricing optimization, and assessments of customer profitability at the contract level.
And can you speak more about your board chairman for the Michigan Council of Economic Education?
Well, yes, there is a life after Ford. So I formed a small consulting company, and when interesting projects present themselves, then I'm happy to do it. But I'm busy with some other things as well. As you mentioned, I'm the chairman of the board of the Michigan Council for Economic Education, which has as its mission preparing teachers to do a better job teaching economics and personal finance to Michigan students. And I'm involved in some volunteer activities. And
Yes, so that's good to know. In your Ford career, so coming back to the topic of the series, ROI in AI. So ROI stands for return on investment. So how do you define ROI? And in Ford career, what did you learn about adding value to the customer projects?
well, I speak very briefly about ROI, which often ends up being something that the finance people go to try and add up. And I'd have to say my own experiences with people trying to calculate an official ROI for projects has been extremely disappointing.
Okay.
And part of that is because it's often difficult to measure the value accurately or
True.
well. There are all kinds of decisions that can be made in the course of doing the analysis. So you can almost get any answer you want. This is quite a problem when you're looking at marketing programs where everybody wants to show things as being successful. And then there are issues related to discounted present value for benefits that are out in the future. So not only aren't they very well known, but then there's a arbitrariness about the translation. So I came to think much more about how I could really well understand the business problems and then look at solving those problems in a way that was really recognized by the business as materially moving the the capabilities of the organization forward, and kind of trusted that that would suffice. So I think one of the real issues is that many programs just are not measured very well in any case. So you know.
So one of the things that I think you have done in Ford is about building a high performing team. And again, that is one of the things that puts a lot of value when you're doing any kind of analytics project, right? So I still remember our first encounter where during my interview, so we started off with a few things, and then you realize that it's almost a lunch time, and you took me for the lunch, and then it was our first meeting, and it was so welcoming to see that a person at senior economist level, he's taking a new employee to the, or not even employee, right? The interviewee to the to the cafeteria and having that lunch together. And I could see that this is like important part of building your team, right? So how would you define all that span and the different efforts that you take to build a high performing team in Ford?
Well, I would say the first element, since you bring it up, is really recruiting. And so you really want to look at people who have a good technical background, but also really display curiosity, intellectual curiosity, people who are good communicators, and people who do come from very different backgrounds and different perspectives, because I wanted to have an intellectually diverse group of people, because there are problems that are for which there's some specialties, and there are different analytic approaches, and so being able to tap into all those was very helpful. So I do think now the new term is everybody's a data scientist, and that kind of flattens the world in a very unfortunate way.
Sure.
Because when I was going to hire, I would look at statisticians, and also people like biostatisticians, people with operations research background, economists, econometricians, physicists. I hired several of them. Okay, so this isn't rocket science, but sometimes it's not so far away.
Right.
And of course, people with with computer science backgrounds.
Right.
So getting everybody talking to each other and saying, this is how I would look at approaching this problem, I think is very helpful.
True, true. The another thing I would like to mention over here, the way in which you used to write the hierarchy on the PowerPoint presentation, right? So again, that was something new for me, that uh, So if I am the principal analyst, my name has to be the first, and then the supervisor's name, and then in the last you used to put your name. I think that giving proper credit to the team is really important to keep them motivated. So can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think that is a really important piece, and it's you think about some of the things that are important when you bring somebody in, and I'll kind of go through it and end up really where that is. So the first thing is when you bring somebody in, you want to have them understand as much as possible about the business. So there's a lot of time telling stories really about, how this place works. Getting a good developmental assignment initially. So you want to have assignments that both play to people's strengths so they can succeed at delivering something, and also some things that are building so that they can develop their skills for the future. Um, so I think part of it is as well is respecting people's opinions and their work styles, which is that and I'm a talker, but it's listening is very important as well.
That's true.
And
That's
so
true.
making sure that it's a comfortable place so people can ask questions.
Right.
And that that aspect of asking important questions and asking questions more deeply, I think has been sort of something that I've carried through my career, and it's really important in your team that they be able to do that as well.
So I think so far in terms of this ROI, we talked about like the value addition that a team can do, and like selecting your right team, right? But and I think the third point that you just mentioned about is asking right questions, and I think that needs a lot of I would say proactiveness to understand more about your customers and the user persona probably. So if you can throw some light about the different things that you have done in Ford, and you must have dealt with like a lot of different types of business users. So were there any challenges of related to any high performance delivery?
Yes, I think there are several. One is that I had the advantage of being an internal consulting, right, to the business. And that had two advantages. One, we were always there, right? And I had ongoing relationships. So it was possible to build trust and to spend time talking to people about really what their problems were, how they saw the business working. Their business intuition informed our analytics, and the analytic results upgraded the business intuition. And so we created a very good ecosystem there. So that's, I think, one, really important aspect of this. And in there, you get people to tell you what their questions are, and then spend a little bit of time not just accepting their answers, but actually thinking, well, what should they be asking? Or what is it possible that we could answer that they have not thought? And I've found many, many times that the business will take and generate a question with some embedded assumptions about how the world works or what you can do. And many times they really don't ask very good questions of the analytics team. We can often provide much more than they ask for. And so when you do the analysis, you ought to also be thinking about, are you establishing the data and intellectual infrastructure to answer the next question?
Right.
Or when this question comes back again, how you can give a better answer the next time.
True.
And then you spend time really looking at communicating back what you found. And so a lot of times we would give an answer to the specific question, but then provide back some data insight. And often, and pretty much any time, as you were talking about the presentations, the last few slides in the presentation ought to be, what are the next steps? What are the implications for the business? How are we going to take this and carry it forward? And that includes as well kind of interoperability. Are you designing your solutions so that they play well with other things that the business is doing? And that requires kind of a systemic understanding of the business. If you're a systems thinker and can look at how the parts are related to each other. I was talking earlier about used car prices. This turns out to show up in many, many places. And so we built forecasts for used car prices that could be input into models for how much residual pricing, so lease pricing, basically decisions about what prices should be charged to dealers to buy off-lease vehicles. They went into credit loss models, both in terms of the probability of default and the severity when people defaulted. And then there was basically an integration. So the parts basically were able to play with each other well.
Right.
And many times innovation will show up in multiple ways. And some of them has to be, is the way that I'm answering this question generate output that is really valuable to the organization, perhaps even in ways that the organization hadn't anticipated.
Of course, of course. And on that note, I would like to ask you one question that I think you started your first job somewhere in 1983, correct? Yeah. All right. Yeah, so it's almost like 4 decades that you have seen this analysis field, right? So probably started off with some economic analysis and then probably statistical analysis, then that analysis word changed into analytics. And then there is machine learning, data science, deep learning, AI, and now generative AI. So can you just, explain that entire journey of last 40 years or 4 decades and individually, how that every decade shaped up?
Well, I think the interesting thing has been both the improvement in computing power, but also the amount of data that's basically available to do analysis. So in the first econometric models that I built, we often had problems with degrees of freedom. We really just didn't have enough data. So you spend a lot of time thinking about what is the right functional form or representation to this problem to be able to extract the maximum value out of these very kind of small data sets. A lot of analyses done on annual data.
True.
And so there's been this, in some sense, the problems have gotten bigger. And for a while, it was always this thing about, we're working in big data. Well, the data are always big. It's just been relatively bigger.
True.
But I think part of the thing that came out of that time was you spend really a lot more time on how the world works. And I think that is still a really important thing. And it is one of the things that I've found in the sort of practice at the end of my time was sometimes being lost. People would go and they would take a whole bunch of data and dump it into a black box, and it would churn out a prediction about something.
Right.
But you would start to interrogate the model or the people who were doing it, and they really didn't understand the data. And there sometimes were problems that were because they were putting things in that had actually happened after the intervention. So that's not really a good idea for kind of obvious reasons.
Right.
You're essentially, if you have the results as being part of the thing that's predicting something,
right,
it's too late. So I think what I've seen is less modeling for understanding and more
data.
Yes. And I think that's lost because and there are different kinds of problems, right? There are prediction problems for which AI is just profoundly powerful. Those are not the same as forecasting problems, which have a longer time horizon typically. And the one thing about forecasting is relatively easy, except that part about predicting the future.
Right.
So when things go wrong, because they inevitably forecasts are wrong much of the time, you ought to have some idea about why and what the implications are. Or if you get a piece of news, how is this piece of news likely to change my forecast? So there's an intuitive understanding that can come in. And I would say that we used to describe to people who came in that you'd spend 10% of your time kind of on the question, and then 80% of your time or 70% of your time working on the data, and then about 5% of your time working on doing the actual statistical analysis, and then the rest of it was spent explaining it and presenting it. So, and documenting it, which is an important aspect. I think that still is maybe not such a bad ratio, except that you should spend more time on that first stage and the question stage, and spending some time understanding the data.
Right. So to summarize what you just said, so even though new models are keep coming up, I think the fundamental thoughts of understanding the data and understanding the problem statement remains the same.
Yes.
Right? Well, so what do you see going forward? I mean, do you think AI answers everything?
No.
All right. So,
but people will try. But some of the really important processes are human ones, and so we shouldn't leave that out.
Right.
It will still be really important what the incentives are for people who are making decisions about what gets implemented and what doesn't. And if you're looking at, say, getting a high-performing team in there, then you have to have, it's a fundamentally human process. It involves listening to people, respect, not wasting their time, and recognizing their efforts.
That's good to know. So yeah, so that's all from my side for today. And any final advice to our audience?
Well, yeah, I did have a couple of thoughts on that. One is focus on the quality of the questions and ask more questions. That's an iterative process, but spending time at the beginning. Are we really asking the right thing? Because it's very seldom that it works out well to have, it's very hard to have the right answer to the wrong question.
That's right.
Know your data. And it is extremely helpful to have an ongoing dialogue between the analytics side and the business customer.
That's really important.
Yes, it really is, because that follow-up is kind of, well, what next? And part of that follow-up really ought to be evaluating how well the interventions perform that are driven by the analysis. Sometimes it's very straightforward, but often it is not. And you should know this because when you were working on my team, we were doing program evaluation. Correct. Yes. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today, and it was lovely talking to you today. Well, I have to say, one of the things that when you're a manager over a long period of time, is you hope to see the success of the people that you have on your team. And it's been really lovely being here and just seeing how you have taken some of those examples and are building your own high-performance team. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and it's been a pleasure meeting them and seeing how good they are. Thank you.